At my son Mason's wedding, just as the string quartet paused and the guests leaned in, his new bride, Chloe, now my daughter-in-law, brushed past me in her white satin gown. She smiled sweetly and whispered, "Your room at the nursing home is ready." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. Mason didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. So I took the microphone and read my new will aloud, stripping them both of the fortune they came here to claim. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The Spanish moss hung low from the oaks, as if the trees themselves were leaning in to hear the vows. Guests fanned themselves gently in the Georgia heat, their folding chairs arranged in perfect rows on the manicured lawn of the Bradford estate. Lanterns swayed from wrought iron hooks, and a quartet played softly near the back hedge, their notes floating like cotton in the summer air. Elaine Bradford stood just behind the floral archway, her posture straight despite the arthritis that had begun to curl her fingers. Her silver hair was swept into a French twist, and her navy silk dress shimmered faintly beneath the sunlight. In her hand, she held a lace-edged handkerchief. Not for tears, she hadn't cried in years, but for show. Mason, her only son, stood at the front in a tailored cream suit, beaming. He looked every inch the Southern gentleman, but Elaine knew better. Charm had always come easy to him, character had not. The string music paused. A hush rippled through the guests. And then, Chloe. The bride glided forward like a statue in motion, her white satin gown catching the light, her veil framing a smile so polished it nearly blinded. As she passed Elaine, she didn't pause, didn't break stride. Her lips barely moved, but her voice slid out like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Your room at the nursing home is ready." Elaine didn't flinch, not visibly. But for a split second, her fingers tightened around the handkerchief. She adjusted her vintage emerald brooch, Henry's last anniversary gift to her, and watched the back of Chloe's veil disappear up the aisle. The ceremony moved forward. Vows were exchanged. Applause echoed beneath the arching trees. But Hannah, standing off to the side with her camera, caught the moment her grandmother's eyes lost their warmth. It was as if a light behind them had been switched off, replaced by something colder, more calculating. At the reception, glasses clinked beneath strings of Edison bulbs strung across the garden. Mason and Chloe held court near the champagne fountain, posing for selfies and laughing too loudly. The heat had settled into a balmy cling. Waiters passed around shrimp puffs and mini pecan tarts on silver trays. Elaine remained seated near a white hydrangea centerpiece, her smile soft but unreadable. She hadn't touched her glass of sparkling cider. Chloe eventually tapped a fork against her flute. "A toast," she called, commanding the tense attention with effortless poise. "To new beginnings, to family, and to the generation that paved the way before us." She turned toward Elaine, all teeth and glow. "Our beloved elder, the foundation on which this family stands." A polite smattering of applause followed. Someone laughed. Another whispered, "Sweet of her." Elaine rose slowly, excusing herself with a faint smile. Her steps were measured, deliberate, as she walked across the cobblestone path, heels clicking softly against stone. She passed by Reverend Banks, who gave her a small nod. His eyes were kind, but knowing. He had seen it too. She didn't stop walking until she reached the French doors of the estate. Inside, the air was cool, silent, and untouched by performance. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, one hand pressed against the old wood of the wall. Then she moved to her study. From the drawer of a walnut writing desk, she withdrew a single folded sheet, creased perfectly down the center. Her eyes flicked to the photo on the side table, her and Henry, arm in arm decades ago at a company gala. She touched the frame, then tucked the paper into her clutch. Back outside, Chloe was mid-story about her honeymoon itinerary. Mason had his hand on her back, his smile a little too fixed. Elaine stepped to the edge of the dance floor, her voice cutting clean through the music. "I have something to read before dessert." Every head turned. Carla Dean, standing at the perimeter with a glass of sparkling water, looked up and gave the faintest nod. And Hannah, watching from near the punch bowl, smiled just once. Elaine stood alone at the edge of the dance floor, the mic in one hand, the folded paper in the other. The reception had stilled. Even the clink of glasses stopped. Somewhere in the background, the quartet faltered mid-note, as if instinctively aware that the tempo of the evening had shifted. Her voice was calm, not raised, not shaking. "I won't keep you long," she began. "I know the shrimp is more interesting than I am." A few awkward laughs. Chloe blinked rapidly. Mason stiffened beside her, unsure whether to smile or sit. Elaine unfolded the paper slowly, smoothing its creases with the edge of her palm. The microphone caught the crisp sound of it, deliberate, unhurried. "This," she said, "is an addendum to my last will and testament, filed 2 weeks ago, witnessed, notarized, and legal as of June 13th. Chloe's champagne glass tipped slightly in her hand. She righted it quickly, her knuckles white against the stem. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it again. Elaine's tone didn't change. It remained measured, soft even, but her words landed like stones thrown across still water. "To Mason Bradford, my son, and Chloe Bradford, my daughter-in-law, this letter confirms a revocation of all previous inheritance rights and business entitlements." A murmur rolled through the guests like wind through the trees. Elaine continued, her eyes steady on the page. "You are hereby removed from the list of named beneficiaries. This includes, but is not limited to, the estate, all property holdings, family trust allocations, company shares, and liquid assets." Chloe gasped audibly. Mason took a half-step forward, lips parted as if to interrupt, but froze under the collective weight of dozens of watching eyes. Elaine looked up. "I have no interest in legacy driven by convenience or obligation. My name, my work, and my home will not be a retirement plan for the ungrateful." The silence that followed was not polite. It was stunned. From the back of the crowd, Carla Dean dipped her head once, her expression unreadable. She tucked her phone back into her bag without a word. Reverend Banks closed his eyes for a moment, resting both hands on his cane as if in silent prayer. Elaine's gaze swept across the gathering, from the raised eyebrows of extended cousins to the wide eyes of distant friends, but she didn't look at Mason or Chloe again. "The will is final," she said, folding the page and sliding it back into her clutch. "Dessert will be served shortly. I suggest you enjoy it." Then, without waiting for applause or protest, she turned and walked toward the estate. The lace hem of her dress whispered against the flagstones as she moved, posture erect, presence commanding. Behind her, a silence hung heavier than the Georgia air. Chloe set her champagne flute down so hard it cracked against the table. "She can't do that," she hissed. "She just did," said Hannah, appearing beside her, tone mild. Mason turned to her. "Hannah!" But the teenager had already walked away, her curls bouncing as she headed after her grandmother, the faintest smirk on her lips. Back inside, Elaine paused in the foyer, leaning briefly against the antique credenza. The adrenaline was beginning to ebb, leaving a cold clarity in its place. She opened the hall closet and reached for a pair of low-heeled flats. Slipped them on. From the mirror beside the door, her reflection looked back, not smug, not angry, just settled, as if she'd finally, after years of bending and biting her tongue, taken one necessary breath of clean air. She adjusted her brooch, and behind her, through the stained glass panels of the door, Mason's voice rose sharply. "She's lost her mind." Elaine smiled faintly. By the time the guests began nervously picking at their key lime tarts, Chloe was already storming through the French doors. "Elaine," she barked, heels clicking like a metronome of rage, "you do not get to humiliate me like that in front of everyone." Elaine stood in the hallway beneath the portrait of Henry, his painted gaze calm above the antique sideboard. She didn't turn around. Chloe's voice pitched higher. "Is this about the brochures? The rehab center? That was a suggestion, not a—" Mason caught up, breathless. "Mom, look, this doesn't have to be public. We can talk, just us. You blindsided us. You don't want this in court." Elaine turned slowly, her heels grounded, her expression unreadable. "You're right," she said coolly. "That's why Carla filed it at 8 a.m. this morning. The court already has everything." Mason's mouth opened, then closed. Chloe blinked like she'd been slapped. You filed it before the wedding? Elaine tilted her head. You planned a future without me. I simply finalized it. She walked past them both, ignoring Mason's attempt to reach for her elbow. Any further communication, she added over her shoulder, goes through my attorney. Chloe scoffed. Are you serious? Elaine didn't respond. From the doorway, Reverend Banks watched with a quiet sorrow. He said nothing, but his hand rested briefly over his chest, a private benediction. The next morning, the Georgia sun burned hot through the gauzy curtains of Elaine's study. A soft breeze stirred the papers on her desk. Carla Dean sat opposite her in a crisp dove-gray pantsuit, legal pad open, reading glasses perched low. Her tone was neutral, precise. The court accepted the filing without issue. As of 9:16 a.m., the updated will is entered into public record. There's nothing they can contest without committing perjury. Elaine nodded. Good. Carla glanced over her notes. Do you want me to notify them formally? No, Elaine said. I've drawn my boundary. I expect them to respect it, or go through you. Carla clicked her pen. Then they'll go through me. A soft ping interrupted them, a message alert on Elaine's phone. She picked it up, brows arching. Chloe's mother, Ruth Ann, had posted a filtered photo of the reception cake with the caption, When bitter women try to spoil a sweet day, but frosting always wins. Elaine gave a humorless smile. So much for discretion. She opened the post, took a screenshot, and forwarded it to Carla with a few taps. Just in case. Carla barely blinked. Duly noted. That evening, twilight settled over the estate like a silk shawl. Crickets sang beneath the rose hedges, and the scent of honeysuckle crept through the open windows. Elaine sat in the solarium, sipping a mint tea, her ankles crossed beneath a soft throw. She'd changed into linen slacks and a simple cream blouse. The estate felt strangely lighter, no longer haunted by anticipation. The door creaked. Hannah's head popped in. Grandma? Elaine looked up, surprised. Hannah, it's late. I know. I snuck out the side gate. Mom's too busy rage-scrolling Instagram. Elaine couldn't help a quiet laugh. Hannah came closer, her sneakers silent on the tiled floor. She looked older today. Maybe it was the way her chin tilted up, or how her gaze didn't flinch. Hannah hesitated, then crouched next to the armchair. That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. Elaine studied her. You understood what it meant? Oh, yeah. Hannah grinned. You didn't just drop the mic. You buried it in the backyard and planted roses over it. Elaine smiled, but her eyes misted. I was worried you'd be mad, Hannah added. That I didn't say anything sooner. Elaine reached out, brushing a curl from her granddaughter's forehead. You stayed quiet when it mattered. And now, you're here. The porch light flickered once. Somewhere a wind chime sang. Hannah reached into her jacket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Found this in the guest room. You left it in the drawer. Elaine opened it slowly. Inside sat Henry's pocket watch, the back engraved with her initials. She closed her fingers around it. Thank you, she whispered. By midweek, the garden had bloomed wider than usual, white lilies stretching toward the sun as if pulled by something unseen. Inside the estate, however, the mood was coldly administrative. Elaine sat in her study again, hair pinned back with meticulous care, not for vanity, but for order. Across from her, Carla Dean slid a folder across the mahogany desk with practiced ease. This, Carla said, tapping a pale blue tab, is the original transfer of majority stock, dated 1998. Your husband placed full ownership of Bradford Interiors in your name after his second heart episode. It was witnessed, notarized, and never amended. Elaine opened the folder slowly. The document felt heavier than paper. It felt like proof of something she had always known, but never fully weaponized. No mention of Mason or Chloe? She asked, eyes skimming. None, Carla said. Not in title, not in access, not even a vesting clause. Elaine let out a soft breath, less surprise than satisfaction. She's been calling herself Director of Development on social media, she murmured, with no development and no direction. Carla didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched, barely. I'll begin drafting revocation of access forms, Carla said. Company systems, email privileges, corporate cards, they're done. Elaine nodded. Good. End it. Later that evening, the sky had gone soft and gold. Reverend Banks arrived unannounced, hat in hand, shoulders slumped with the wear of wisdom. Elaine met him on the porch, her glass of lemon water sweating against the heat. May I sit? He asked. Always. They sat in silence for a long while, watching the light shift through the trees. The old reverend finally spoke without turning his head. Henry came to see me, a year before he passed. Elaine looked over. Said he was worried, Reverend Banks continued. Said Chloe was performance without foundation, that she watched you like a rival instead of family. Elaine's jaw didn't tighten, but her voice cooled. He never told me that. He didn't want you burdened, the Reverend replied, but he wanted me to remember it, in case she ever rose too quickly. Elaine gave a small nod, her eyes fixed on the path beyond the garden. She didn't rise, she said. She climbed on my name, and now I'm pulling the ladder. The next day, Carla returned with another set of documents. They sat in the breakfast nook this time, sunlight streaking across the wood table like melted gold. Here, she said, pushing forward a short form with bold lines. This updates your healthcare proxy. You've listed me before? Want to keep it that way? Elaine paused. Yes, officially, permanently. Carla signed her portion, not even looking up. And the educational trust? Elaine hesitated for only a moment before she smiled. Add Hannah, co-trustee. She's 17. She's old enough, Elaine said. She has more judgment in her than both her parents combined. Carla filed the papers into her leather briefcase, methodical and silent. Elaine reached for the teapot and poured them both a fresh cup, the scent of chamomile mingling with the scent of lilac drifting through the screen door. That evening, Elaine walked through the upstairs hall and paused outside the room that used to be Mason's. The door was shut, still painted navy from when he'd been 12. She turned the knob and stepped inside. Dust lingered on the old trophy shelf. An abandoned tie clip sat in a tray on the dresser, engraved with his initials, M.B. Elaine looked at it, then closed the drawer. Her footsteps echoed lightly as she walked back toward the stairs. Halfway down, her phone buzzed. A message from Chloe Bradford. Subject: urgent. Company access error. Elaine didn't open it. She simply forwarded it to Carla with a single line. Not my problem. Yours now. She reached the landing, where Hannah stood waiting with a folder of her own, college brochures tucked neatly inside. Elaine gave a soft smile. Let's make some real plans. The envelope arrived on a Monday. A thick white packet from the Superior Court of Chatham County. Elaine opened it with a silver letter opener, her hands steady. Inside, a formal petition to challenge her will on the grounds of diminished capacity, filed by Mason and Chloe Bradford. Elaine read it once, then again. At the bottom, her son's signature. Neat, practiced, hollow. She set it aside and dialed Carla. By Friday morning, the evaluation had been arranged. Elaine sat upright in her sunroom, facing the court-appointed geriatric psychiatrist. He was young, cautious, and polite, scribbling notes between questions about dates, names, memories, executive function. When were you married? He asked. May 14, 1976. It rained for 15 minutes during the vows, Elaine replied. Henry said God was just softening the ground. And today's date? June 21st, she said. And if Mason's handwriting on that petition is any indicator, his cognition should be the one in question. The doctor smiled involuntarily. At the end of the session, he set his clipboard down. Ms. Bradford, I've administered over 400 of these evaluations. You passed before I finished the second page. Elaine sipped her mint water. I've been underestimated for decades. That won't be happening again. The court date arrived under a cloudless sky. Elaine entered the courthouse in a navy blue skirt suit with ivory trim, pearls at her throat, hair styled immaculately. She walked with purpose, cane-free. In the second pew, Chloe dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before the proceedings even began. Her outfit was strategically conservative, soft pink, simple neckline, hair curled and parted sweetly. She glanced around, gauging the room. It wasn't pity she wanted. It was persuasion. Mason sat beside her, jaw clenched, dressed as if it were a board meeting, dark gray suit, tie askew. Carla stood at the defense table, files aligned, expression locked in neutral readiness. The judge, a woman in her 60s, entered briskly and nodded to the clerk. "Let's begin." Chloe went first. I've seen so many changes in Elaine," she said, voice trembling. "She gets confused, repeats herself, forgets things. I didn't want to say anything, but we're worried it's not like her." The judge tilted her head. "You're her daughter-in-law, correct?" "Yes, I'm just trying to protect her legacy." "From her own decisions?" Chloe's jaw twitched. Mason stood. "Your Honor, we believe my mother is being manipulated, that she's vulnerable." "By whom?" the judge asked flatly. He faltered. We don't know exactly, but the changes are drastic." The judge glanced down at the evaluation report. "According to a state-licensed professional, your mother displays above-average cognitive function for her age with no impairment to decision-making." Mason opened his mouth, but Carla rose before he could respond. "I'd like to submit Exhibit C," she said calmly. "A copy of social media posts where Mrs. Chloe Bradford lists herself as Director of Bradford Interiors, a title she's never legally held." She handed the folder to the bailiff. "And Exhibit D," Carla continued, "a photograph of a pamphlet Chloe prepared without consent, placing Ms. Bradford in a memory care facility." The judge reviewed it. Slowly, deliberately. When she looked up, her eyes were sharper than before. "Do you know what this looks like, Ms. Bradford?" Chloe blinked. "What?" "Positioning someone out of the way for financial benefit." A silence settled over the room. Elaine stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You placed me in a category," she said clearly. "I placed you outside of mine." The judge lifted her gavel. "Petition dismissed. Will stands as filed." Outside the courthouse, the sun cast long shadows over the marble steps. Mason followed Elaine down the steps quickly, his shoes clicking behind her. "Mom, just wait," he said. "We didn't mean to." She didn't even slow. "Please," he said. "We were scared." Chloe thought. Elaine turned once, looked at him flatly. "I used to wonder if you were pretending to be spineless. I see now it's your natural shape." She descended the rest of the stairs without another word. Back inside, Carla handed a manila envelope to Chloe, who was still seated, still clutching her tissue like it might save her. "What's this?" Chloe asked. Carla smiled faintly. "An invoice for attempted fraud, court fees, and defamation damages. Our office accepts checks or wire transfers. No credit cards." Elaine sat at the kitchen island the next morning, sleeves rolled, reading glasses low on her nose, a yellow legal pad beside her, and a thick folder of bank statements fanned out like a paper crown. The estate was quiet. Hannah still asleep upstairs, Carla off at a board meeting, the staff politely keeping their distance. Only the soft clink of a teaspoon in her teacup broke the silence. She picked up a pen, poised it above the pad, and began. 2006, $12K for down payment help, never repaid. 2011, $8.4K for Chloe's bridge loan between jobs. 2014, $31K to cover tax penalties Mason forgot to mention. 2018, $15K wedding vendor deposit refund shortage. On and on it went. 37 entries in total, 6 figures, all quietly siphoned in moments of manufactured emergency, always dressed in soft excuses. "We just need a little help, Mom. It's temporary. We'll pay it back once things settle." Things never settled. Elaine wrote a title across the top of the final page in clean, unwavering script. Personal loans, unpaid. She folded it once, slid it into a labeled file marked for estate review, financial anomalies, and placed it on the edge of the counter just as Carla walked in from the garden. Carla took one look at the folder and arched an eyebrow. Elaine offered a single word, "Receipts." Carla cracked the file open, read the first 2 entries, and let out the softest exhale. "Want this appended to the record?" Elaine nodded. "Under non-recoverable transfers. I'm done carrying their debts in silence." Across town, Chloe was posting again. Her Instagram feed had turned moody overnight. No more photos of brunch or monogrammed towels, just curated melancholy, a candle burning low, a single rain-soaked window pane. Captions like, "Some people turn their backs when you need them most. Gratitude should be mutual." Funny how the richest people are often the coldest. The comments, however, were less sympathetic than she'd hoped. Coastal Maven. "Didn't you just have a designer wedding on your MIL's property?" Thurs Savannah. Gossip. "I remember you calling her the antique in the attic. Weird switch now." Truth over toast. "Try being less vague and more employed." Chloe deleted 2, blocked 4, then locked her profile entirely. Back at the estate, Hannah found a stack of color printouts waiting on her bed. "I thought you might enjoy a project," Elaine said as she passed by the door, casual. Hannah flipped through the pages, screenshots of Chloe's posts, her captions, the comments, all annotated with dates and usernames. "What am I supposed to do with these?" Elaine smiled. "Start your archive. Every betrayal deserves footnotes." Hannah grinned. "For the memory book?" Elaine winked. "Exactly." That evening, as the sun dipped below the moss-draped oaks, Elaine moved through the upstairs hallway carrying a small cedar box. Inside were pieces that never made it to public display. Henry's fountain pen, her mother's old locket, a dried pressed rose from the first bouquet Mason ever gave her as a child, back when affection came unprompted. She entered Hannah's room without knocking. It was already taking shape. Books organized alphabetically, plants on the windowsill, a bulletin board filled with travel postcards and post-it notes of future plans. Elaine opened the cedar box and began placing items quietly along the top shelf of Hannah's desk. A velvet pouch containing the pearl earrings she wore on her wedding day, a leather-bound notebook with embossed gold letters, "Private," a vintage skeleton key. Hannah came in moments later, stopping in the doorway. "What's all this?" Elaine didn't look up. "Pieces of history. Not for sentiment. For custody." They stood in silence as the cicadas began to sing outside. Then Hannah whispered, "Are you scared?" Elaine turned. "No," she said, "because now they're the ones scrambling." The Bradford Interior's annual gala had always been a spectacle. Ballroom lighting on rented magnolias, champagne towers 3 stories tall, and photographers eager to capture legacy in motion. This year, it was held at the Savannah Civic Conservatory, a glass-paneled space wrapped in climbing ivy, with views of the river glittering just beyond the terrace. But the real shimmer that night didn't come from the decor. It came from Elaine. She arrived precisely at 7 p.m., stepping out of a deep navy town car in a black velvet suit tailored within an inch of defiance. Pearl drop earrings, red lips, no escort, no hesitation. She walked the carpet alone, cameras flashing like she was the headline, because she was. Behind her, Hannah exited on the opposite side, wearing a midnight blue gown, clean lines, no sparkle, just poise. She walked 2 steps behind her grandmother, not out of submission, but quiet deference. Inside, Mason lingered awkwardly near the raw oyster bar, adjusting his cufflinks for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Chloe hovered at his side, her gown sleek and expensive, her smile brittle beneath the lights. She was used to owning rooms with posture alone. Tonight, she was barely noticed. The energy shifted the moment Elaine entered. A hush, then applause. Not for the company, not for Mason, for her. She took the mic with one gloved hand, pausing long enough to make eye contact with the board chair before speaking. "This company was built on sweat, foresight, and second chances," she began. "It survived recessions, lawsuits, and my husband's untimely death, but it has never belonged to any one generation." She turned toward Hannah, who stepped forward with perfect timing. "I am proud to announce the new youth-led initiative, the Next Foundations Project, a program created not to protect legacy, but to earn it." Polite applause gave way to real interest as murmurs swept through the ballroom. Elaine continued, "This program will be co-led by a young woman who has witnessed what it means to protect values when it's most inconvenient, who doesn't wait for invitations. She earns her place." Hannah stepped up beside her. "No nerves, just clarity." Chloe stiffened, clapping once, then lowering her hands as no cameras turned toward her. Near the back of the room, Carla moved to the podium. She spoke with that measured calm that always made people listen. Alongside this initiative, we're establishing the Henry Bradford Scholarship Fund, seeded by what would have been private inheritance accounts. Gasps scattered across the floor. Chloe blinked twice. Mason furrowed his brow. Elaine met their eyes briefly, then looked away like they were strangers interrupting a film. This fund, Carla continued, will support students pursuing ethical leadership in business, environmental design, and public policy, those who build for others, not just themselves. Someone near the front stood up to applaud. A second followed, and that's when Mason stepped forward. He didn't take the stairs to the stage, he went straight for the mic. "I'd like to say a few words," he announced. Security moved fast. 2 suited staff members intercepted him, gently but firmly blocking his path. "Mr. Bradford," one said, "this segment has been cleared for approved speakers only." "I am Bradford," he snapped. Elaine didn't turn around. Reverend Banks stood from his table near the edge of the room and slowly made his way toward the stage. He wore a simple dark suit, his presence calm and anchoring. When he reached the podium, the room fell silent. He looked out across the crowd and said, "Some inherit wisdom, some inherit warnings." Then he stepped back. Elaine and Hannah exited through the side corridor as the applause swelled behind them. Hannah's hand brushed lightly against her grandmother's sleeve. "You're not tired?" she asked. Elaine smirked. "I'm in velvet, dear. You don't get tired in velvet, you command." 2 days after the gala, Elaine stepped into a lobby that smelled faintly of lavender air freshener and sterilized silence. The Brook Hollow Pines assisted living facility sat on the edge of town, tucked behind a medical complex and framed by sad hedges trimmed within an inch of personality. A receptionist in a sage green cardigan looked up from her computer with a practiced, overbright smile. "Mrs. Bradford, we've been expecting you." Elaine blinked once. "Have you?" "Oh yes. Chloe sent your intake information weeks ago," the woman said, rising from her desk and motioning toward a small seating area. "We've prepared a private room on the east wing. Very quiet. You'll love the view of the koi pond." Elaine didn't move toward the armchair. She stood in the center of the lobby, gaze sweeping over the taupe walls and the rotating mural of inspirational quotes etched in vinyl near the elevator bank. "Aging is not lost youth but a new stage of opportunity." She tilted her head. "Is that so?" The receptionist began pulling up a digital file. "We've already started a preliminary care plan, meds, dietary preferences. Chloe listed you as lactose sensitive." Elaine cut in, her voice cool but not loud. "Tell me something." The woman stopped typing. "If I'd walked in unannounced, would you still be this ready?" The pause answered her. Elaine looked toward the hallway beyond the lobby. A custodian mopped quietly near the doors to the east wing. A nurse wheeled a sedated resident past, humming tunelessly. Then she turned without a word and walked out. That evening, from the comfort of her study, Elaine addressed an envelope with crisp, angular lettering. Inside was a single photograph, her estate gates, freshly painted and framed in golden hour light. Across the wrought iron arch, she had hung a black and gold sign, bold lettering, no flourish, private. She mailed it without a return address. The next morning, Hannah wandered into the east wing of the house looking for her phone charger. The old guest room, once beige, impersonal, and crowded with forgotten furniture, had changed. A new comforter in dusty rose, a reading lamp with 3 dimmer settings, a framed poster of a New England coastline. Even a small potted fern sat by the windowsill. Her charger was plugged in next to a note card, set neatly on the pillow. "This room belongs to you now. You don't have to ask." Hannah stood in the doorway for a long moment, fingers brushing the door frame. No one had ever given her space before, not without strings, not without hovering expectations. She curled onto the bed, face buried in the fresh linens, and let herself feel the strange gravity of belonging. Downstairs, Carla sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and 3 property files spread out between them. "All done," she said, clicking one final document with surgical precision. The title transfers are recorded. The estate, the downtown townhouse, and the Lake Murray cottage are now consolidated under your sole trust." Elaine, seated across from her in a cardigan and pearl-studded slippers, sipped her espresso. "And the old revocable trust?" "Dissolved. There's nothing they can contest. Every inch of it is yours." Elaine nodded. "And Hannah?" "Contingency beneficiary, alternate trustee, and designated executor if anything happens to me." "Good." Carla paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "Chloe's been silent since the magazine ad. Too quiet." Elaine's mouth curved, but not into a smile. "She thinks silence is strategy." Carla leaned forward. "And is it?" "No," Elaine said. "It's surrender in a prettier dress." That night, as the Spanish moss swayed under moonlight, Elaine stood on the back terrace holding a glass of Bordeaux. The estate was still, owned, guarded, hers. She looked up at the stars, then down at the gravel drive. A flicker of headlights crept past the front gate, then backed out. The vault had been sealed since 1982. Behind the false panel in Henry's study, a room no one used anymore but Elaine, sat a mahogany filing cabinet too old for electronics and too solid for tampering. The brass lock clicked open with a key Elaine had kept hidden in her sewing kit for 4 decades. Inside, at the back, beneath layers of obsolete contracts and dusty ledgers, was a slim red binder marked simply BF Fund, Confray. Elaine pulled it out gently, like lifting an artifact. She turned each page slowly, Henry's meticulous notes, dated deposits, early stock investments, and one final line in his handwriting. For her use, in her time. No heirs, no ties, only purpose. Elaine sat very still. Then she smiled. 2 weeks later, the press release hit Savannah's inboxes like a late summer storm. Bradford Foundation announces Women's Intergenerational Grant Initiative. The accompanying photo was elegant. Elaine seated in her library, hands folded, with Hannah standing just behind her, one hand resting on the chair, looking forward, not at the camera, but at the future. The fund's initial endowment? $3.7 million. Chloe saw the headline while scrolling in a nail salon. Her phone buzzed 3 times in quick succession, text after text from her dwindling circle of enablers. "Did you know about this? Wasn't that your money?" "Wait, how is Hannah co-director?" Her jaw clenched. She opened her banking app out of habit and blinked. A denied notice sat at the top of the screen. Her most recent credit application had been rejected. She tapped into the report. Reason: high-risk applicant, flagged for pending liens and associated name on fraud inquiry. She nearly dropped the phone. Across town, Mason sat at a cafe trying to reach Hannah. Call, voicemail, text, silence. He typed again, trying a different tactic. "You know none of this is what it looks like. She's just trying to erase us. I'm still your dad." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then nothing. Hannah blocked the number. That evening, Carla entered Elaine's office with a sealed folder in hand. "Confirmed," she said. "Chloe used dormant real estate investment funds to float a personal startup without disclosing assets. The LLC is upside down." Elaine leaned back in her chair. "Liens?" "Filed as of this morning. She'll find out when the notice hits her inbox." Elaine turned toward the window, where the garden was being prepared for an autumn fundraising dinner. Lanterns were already strung across the branches, swaying in the breeze. "And the fund?" she asked. "Fully structured," Carla replied. "Applications open next month. First round awarded in spring. Oversight board includes you, Hannah, and 3 former grantees." Elaine nodded once, then turned to the small typewriter still sitting beneath the window, a gift from her first editorial job, never thrown away. She rolled in a fresh sheet of paper, typed a single sentence, then handed it to Carla. Carla read it aloud. "Let them rise by merit, not marriage." She folded the page and slid it into an envelope addressed to the company's board of directors. 3 states away, Chloe stepped into a boutique co-working space she'd been using to pitch a wellness startup. A notice was taped to the front glass door. "Closed for non-payment. Contact building management to remove property." She ripped it down and stormed back to her car. A group of 20-somethings passing by gave her a second look, not in recognition, but in that pitying way people do when someone used to mean something. She hit her steering wheel, then her phone buzzed again. This time it was a legal notice. Lien initiated. Total claim, $312,400. The sender? Dean and Associates. She didn't even open it, just screamed once, loud enough to rattle the rearview mirror. Back at the estate, Hannah knelt near the back fence planting tulip bulbs, hands dirty and focused. Elaine watched her from the window, arms crossed loosely. "That's legacy," she whispered. "Not portfolios, not titles. Work, grounded, quiet, real." The conference room at Dean and Associates wasn't grand, just glass walls, polished wood, and quiet power. Elaine sat at the head of the table, her reading glasses perched low, the autumn light catching the edge of her tailored charcoal blazer. In front of her, a single-page document rested neatly between a fountain pen and a porcelain teacup. Carla sat beside her, calm as ever. She pushed the file forward with one manicured finger. "This makes it official," she said. "The trademark and operating name transfer for Bradford Family Holdings is now reassigned under the Bradford Women's Legacy Foundation. All public associations with the old family business, press, partnerships, branding, now run through the nonprofit." Elaine didn't hesitate. She signed. And just like that, the Bradford name no longer belonged to its most recent users. It belonged to its original architect. And that afternoon, Carla served Chloe a cease and desist via certified mail and direct courier, along with an accompanying legal summary that was, in Carla's words, brief, brutal, and binding. The terms were clear. Chloe was prohibited from using Bradford Family Holdings or any variation thereof in any professional, personal, or promotional material. Retroactively and forward-facing, the ink wasn't dry before Chloe was already on a call with her fourth PR rep in 3 weeks, trying to rebrand the brand without admitting she never owned it. The press got a hold of the filing. One headline read, "Matriarch Reclaims Legacy, Erases Pretenders." It trended locally for 2 days. At a different cafe this time, Mason sat hunched over a resume draft, trying to reword a past that had just been wiped from under him. He'd quietly submitted a name change request 3 days earlier. Too many interviewers were Googling him. Too many whispers followed. Bradford no longer opened doors. It closed them. His new surname? Taylor. His mother's maiden name. He told people it was for branding simplicity, but in truth, it was the final surrender. Back at the estate, Elaine reclined in the sunroom as Carla read aloud the final section of the revised will. "And henceforth, Elaine Margaret Bradford removes Mason Bradley Bradford and Chloe Grace Bradford from any claim of inheritance, executor authority, or name-based entitlements, effective in perpetuity." She paused. "No room for misinterpretation," Carla added. Elaine raised her glass of hibiscus tea. "Cheers to clarity." Hannah walked in then, holding a slim envelope with the foundation's crest embossed in deep blue. "First grant donation arrived," she said, placing it carefully into the small wall safe hidden behind a framed watercolor of the estate gardens. Elaine watched her slide the steel door closed, dial the lock, and tuck the key back into the brass bowl on the bookshelf. "That felt permanent," Hannah said. "It is," Elaine replied. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. Outside, the light softened into early evening. A new brass plaque had been installed near the estate's gate that morning, just beneath the wrought iron arch that once read Bradford House. The updated inscription gleamed, "Bradford Women's Legacy Foundation, established 2025, built on work, not whispers." At that same hour, Chloe refreshed her website portfolio and froze. A red error banner spread across the top of the page. Unauthorized use of registered mark removed by host compliance. 3 of her social links were broken. 2 of her partnerships had pulled out. She opened her email. At the top was a message from a potential investor. "We no longer associate with the Bradford name. It doesn't carry weight, it carries lawsuits." Back at the estate, Elaine stepped out onto the terrace with a legal pad and her pen. She began drafting a speech for the upcoming foundation gala. Hannah joined her, notebook in hand. "You ever think they'll stop trying?" Hannah asked. Elaine didn't look up. "No." But they'll get quieter. The garden had been transformed. Tables draped in cream linen curved in soft arcs beneath the moss-draped oaks. Gold-rimmed china gleamed in the soft sunlight, and a jazz trio played near the veranda, their notes light and warm. The scent of rosemary and roasted peach drifted from the buffet table, where a catering staff, hand-selected by Elaine, moved with seamless grace. She hadn't lifted a finger. Not one platter arranged, not one chair straightened, not one garnish fussed over. And still, it was perfect, because this wasn't a party for spectacle. It was a gathering for legacy. Elaine stood at the head of the longest table, dressed in a tailored ivory pantsuit, her brooch a glint of emerald against the lapel. Around her sat faces that knew every version of her. Housekeepers who'd worked through hurricanes, board members who'd stuck by her when Mason tried to dissolve voting shares, 2 retired lawyers who'd once called her dangerously brilliant with a pen, and the scholars, 8 of them, young, eager, radiant with possibility, invited back for the first time in a decade. They passed around handwritten notes, laughing quietly, some wiping tears, others asking about the peach scones like the moment wasn't enormous. Elaine tapped her water glass. The table stilled. "I've been known to host," she began, voice even. "But today, I wanted to gather, not serve." Laughter rippled gently. She unfolded a cream envelope and pulled out several aged letters. "These," she said, holding up the pages, "were written by past recipients of scholarships we issued discreetly, no names printed, no announcements made, just students who needed a door and someone willing to leave it unlocked." She read 2 aloud, the first from a young woman who used the funds to complete her law degree after fleeing a violent home. The second from a first-generation college student who now taught history at a local high school and started a foundation of his own. The table was quiet by the end. Reverend Banks, seated to Elaine's left, raised his glass. "Not every matriarch rules with a fist," he said. "Some rule with facts." Elaine dipped her head, her smile quiet but full. From the hill just beyond the property line, a navy Lexus idled. Inside it, Chloe sat gripping the wheel with fingers that had lost their manicure. She stared through the windshield at the wrought iron gate she used to sail through, as if by birthright. Now, a security guard she didn't recognize stood beneath a small umbrella at the call box. When she drove up, he didn't reach for the buzzer. "Name?" he asked. She lifted her chin. "Chloe Bradford." He looked at his clipboard, flipped one page, then another. "No one by that name expected." "I'm family." He shrugged. "Not on the list." Chloe's eyes flicked to the gate. The new brass plaque gleamed in the sunlight. She reversed, slowly. Back in the garden, Hannah walked across the flagstone with unhurried steps toward the baby grand piano set beneath the pergola. She sat, smoothed her skirt, then looked at Elaine. "This one's called Inheritance," she said softly, and she played. It wasn't ornate or showy, no crescendos, no flourish, just steady notes, measured, grounded, a melody that was more statement than performance. Elaine sat back in her chair and let it wash over her. Then one tear fell. Just one. She didn't wipe it away. She reached up and straightened her necklace instead. Henry's final gift, now hers alone to wear on her terms. The sun had begun to set, casting amber light over the tables, catching in the cutlery, the glasses, the smiles of people who stayed. Elaine stood again, but this time she said nothing. She just raised her glass, and the entire table stood with her. The email subject line read, "Bradford Wedding, Final Album, Download and Review." Elaine clicked it without emotion. The thumbnails began loading in quiet succession, hundreds of curated moments from a day she was never meant to be part of. Chloe and Mason laughing under fairy lights, champagne flutes frozen mid-clink, bridesmaids in blush silk, groomsmen toasting, guests posing. Chloe with her mother beneath the floral arch. Elaine, notably, was in none of them, not a single frame, not even in the background. She tilted her head and smiled, not bitter, not wounded, just amused. Then she clicked Delete Folder and watched the screen flash once before the files vanished from her assistant's cloud backup. A moment later, she opened her messages and typed without overthinking. To Chloe Bradford, I didn't make the album either, but I did make the deed. She hit send and poured herself another cup of tea. In the next room, Hannah scrolled her phone and paused mid-bite of a leftover lemon scone. A ping echoed from the other side of the room, followed by the sound of Elaine's subtle chuckle. "What?" Hannah asked, rising from the couch. Elaine waved her in and turned the screen toward her. Hannah read the message, then burst out laughing, loud and bright and sudden, the kind of laugh that makes your shoulders shake. It was the first time in weeks Elaine had heard her granddaughter let go like that. "I swear," Hannah said, wiping her eye, "that might be the hardest line in this whole saga." Elaine shrugged. "Truth doesn't need padding." Later that afternoon, Carla arrived with a small folder and an elegant smile. "All signatures are sealed," she said. "The final clause has been filed with the clerk's office. The trust is now active and," she tapped the folder, "legally immune to contestation." Elaine took the folder and placed it on the mantel, next to the photo of her and Henry at their 30th anniversary gala. She didn't open it. "I don't need to read it," she said softly. "I wrote it in action." Carla nodded once. "You wrote it in stone." That evening, as the sun cut across the estate in golden slices, a small cream envelope arrived via courier. Hand-addressed, childish handwriting, no return label. Elaine opened it carefully. Inside was a crayon drawing of a girl with a diploma in one hand and a sunflower in the other. A big, sloppy heart took up most of the page. The accompanying note was scrawled but heartfelt. "Thank you for giving my mom her chance. She's the first in our family to finish school. I'm next. Jamie, age 9." Elaine placed the letter on her writing desk, smoothing the creases. She didn't cry, but her fingers lingered on the edge of the paper like she was holding something alive. Upstairs, Hannah sat on the floor of her new room, barefoot, reviewing budget drafts for the spring foundation cycle. Her laptop screen was split between spreadsheets and photos from the brunch, Reverend Banks smiling with 2 scholars, Carla mid-laugh, Elaine raising her glass. She paused on one image, Elaine in profile, framed by Spanish moss and sunlight, regal, radiant, quietly unshakable. She saved the photo into a folder she titled Real Legacy. That night, as the house settled into stillness, Elaine walked the hallways barefoot. She moved room to room, fingers brushing doorframes, curtains, picture frames like a final pass through a museum of her own design. Then she entered Henry's study, sat in the leather armchair, closed her eyes. The brochure arrived in glossy cardstock, a mock-up of a luxury real estate campaign Chloe had titled Southern Elegance, Event Venues with Legacy. On the front cover, prominently displayed, an aerial drone shot of Elaine's estate at golden hour, Spanish moss, rose gardens, and that unmistakable wrought iron gate now repurposed into someone else's sales pitch. The photo had been taken without permission, likely by a vendor Chloe still had leverage over. Elaine placed the brochure on her desk. No emotion crossed her face. She simply picked up the phone and dialed Carla. The injunction was filed by noon. Copyright infringement, unauthorized commercial use of a private residential landmark, defamation through false branding. By end of day, Chloe's promotional site had been pulled. A cease and desist was hand-delivered to her co-working suite, which had already been partially emptied. The walls bare, her name scrubbed off the directory. She didn't bother showing up to dispute it. She knew she couldn't. 2 days later, a for-lease sign appeared in the window of her now-defunct storefront. By the end of the week, a second sign went up next to it. Court-ordered liquidation, inventory auctioned on site. Chloe watched from across the street in oversized sunglasses, arms crossed over a too-thin jacket. The wind picked up and one of the signs slapped against the glass. She flinched. Meanwhile, Mason sat in a government office waiting for his number to be called. A cheap ballpoint pen twitched between his fingers. He submitted the online form 3 days ago and had arrived in person to expedite it. "Bradford," the woman at the counter called. He approached, folding his paperwork neatly. "I filed for unemployment last week," he began. "I've been out of work since the foundation took over. She cut him off, her tone clipped but not unkind. "Application denied," she said. due to prior undisclosed assets and shared liability on active liens. "What liens?" he asked, voice rising. "Your name appears on several joint LLCs tied to a pending fraud investigation." He blinked. She gestured to the appeals form. "You're welcome to contest it." Mason didn't speak. He just took the paper and walked out, head down, shoulders bent. At the estate, Carla reviewed the case file, her expression unreadable. "They had it all," she said, "but none of it was ever really theirs." Elaine, seated across from her, signed the final document with steady precision. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Later that afternoon, in the solitude of her study, Elaine reviewed her funeral arrangements. Every detail was hers. The hymns, traditional, unshowy. The flowers, white camellias only, no eulogies, no platform speeches, just a list of names, read aloud, the ones who stayed. At the bottom of the document, she added one final instruction. "No family title included, just my name." She folded the page, sealed the envelope, and placed it in the fireproof safe with everything else that mattered. Down the hall, Hannah sat beside Carla at the dining room table. They reviewed the estate succession documents together, line by line. "Effective today," Carla said, sliding a notarized form across the table. "You're officially the trustee and the executor." Hannah stared at the page for a long moment, then signed. It was done. That night, the air felt heavier than usual, humid, thick with the scent of fall rain gathering somewhere in the distance. Elaine sat on the back terrace, wrapped in a light shawl, eyes on the moonlit trees beyond the garden wall. She didn't look triumphant. She looked finished, whole, secure. The morning light slipped through the lace curtains in slender ribbons, painting soft gold across Elaine's desk. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt chosen, not empty. She reached for her pen, not the fountain one this time, just a simple ballpoint with a cracked grip, and pulled a yellow sticky note toward her. She wrote, "Carla, please destroy the brochure Chloe gave me. No need for artifacts of delusion." She pressed the note onto the glossy folder and left it on the edge of her desk like an afterthought. But it wasn't. It was final. That afternoon, a check was delivered in silence. A sizable donation to Brook Hollow Pines Assisted Living Facility. Not in Elaine's name. No ceremony, no plaque. Just 3 stipulations typed plainly on the cover letter. Funds to be used solely for staff training and patient dignity resources. No donor attribution to be made publicly. No future contact expected or required. The administrator's assistant read it twice before whispering, "She gave more in silence than they did with headlines." Back at the estate, Hannah found a package waiting on her desk. A flat parcel wrapped in butcher paper, no return address, only her name in cursive ink. Inside was a slim, linen-bound memoir, the title etched in understated gold, "What They Thought Was Weak," by Elaine M. Bradford. The inscription inside, "For the one who asked the fewest questions and understood the most. Let them misunderstand. We'll keep building. E." Hannah closed the cover slowly. Her breath caught just once. Then she opened to the first page and began to read. Later that evening, Carla arrived with a canvas wrapped in parchment and twine. "I commissioned something," she said simply, handing it over. Elaine unwrapped the layers carefully, revealing a painting of the estate at dusk. Lanterns lit, ivy swaying, windows glowing from within. The title painted in the corner, "Still Standing." Elaine studied it for a long moment before nodding once. "It's accurate," she said softly. "It always was the foundation that mattered." On Saturday, the final tea party took place on the garden terrace. 6 place settings, no fanfare, no event photographer, just laughter from the kitchen staff, delicate sandwiches, lemon biscuits, and a teapot the housekeeper Myrna had repaired with gold leaf seams after Chloe once called it shabby. Elaine sat at the head of the table in a pale blue wrap dress, sipping slowly, listening as Myrna told the story of her first week on the job. Laughter bubbled across the table, real, unguarded. Even the gardener came by for a slice of honey cake. No one dressed to impress. They dressed for themselves. At precisely 4:46 p.m., Elaine's phone buzzed on the armrest of her chair. One name. Chloe. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She tapped the screen once. Blocked. The phone fell silent again, as if the call had never happened. That night, Hannah stepped into the sunroom to say goodnight. She paused. Elaine sat alone in her armchair, the painting of the estate propped beside her, her hand resting on the edge of the memoir. No lights on. Just moonlight. "You okay?" Hannah asked gently. Elaine turned, her voice soft but certain. "I've emptied every room they built for me," she said. "Now I'm filling my own." The invitation was printed on thick ivory cardstock, gold-inked and minimalist, with a single embossed line at the bottom. Annual Gala for the Bradford Women's Legacy Foundation, honoring community, continuity, and quiet power. The venue was different this time. Not a ballroom, not a glass conservatory, but the main hall of the newly built Savannah Community Resource Center. Its walls raw with promise and its air humming with something warmer than prestige. Presence. On one side of the atrium, a mural in progress stretched across a curved brick wall, portraits of local women leaders, both known and unsung. And above the entrance, a new plaque had been installed just hours before. Elaine M. Bradford Hall, built on what they underestimated. Elaine arrived in charcoal and pearl, a silver cane by her side. Not for necessity, but statement. It was the same one Henry once gifted her as a joke when she had twisted her ankle and still insisted on finishing a board presentation. Now it matched her stride. She paused at the new plaque, fingers brushing the engraving once, then moved forward into the light. Inside, guests had already gathered, grant recipients, scholars, board members, former staff, even quiet skeptics who had watched the foundation evolve into something unshakable. Reverend Banks waited near the stage, palms folded, eyes bright. Hannah stood just off to the side, poised and glowing, holding a folded page in her hands. Elaine approached the podium slowly, deliberately, and unfolded a different page. One she had written 2 mornings ago at her desk, longhand, before the sun rose. She looked out across the room and began to read. "Dear Hannah, never lower your voice to be accepted. Never dilute your certainty for softer company. They will call you too much before they call you enough. Let them. But write it down, so when they forget what you've done, you won't. With love, E." The room didn't stir, not yet. She folded the letter slowly and nodded toward Hannah, who took her place beside her. The applause began like rain, quiet, then steady, then full. Later, in the reception hall, guests moved through wine and hors d'oeuvres as light from the chandeliers cast soft glows across the floor. At the center of it all stood Reverend Banks, holding a small velvet box. He approached Elaine, opened it, and held out a medallion etched in bronze with the foundation crest and her name around the edge. "It's not a title," he said. "It's proof." Elaine took it, her hand steady. "Proof of what?" she asked. He smiled. "That dignity can outlive disappointment." Near the end of the evening, glasses were filled again, not for formality, but for farewell, not a conclusion, but a confirmation. Hannah raised hers. No microphone, no preamble, just clarity. To women who rewrite what others tried to erase. Glasses clinked. A silence followed, not empty, but reverent. Elaine lifted hers last. And in the hush that followed, she looked upward, not to the ceiling, but through it, somehow. Through the years, through the cost, through everything she had lost that was never really hers to begin with. Then she said it, calm, assured, unbothered. "Let them whisper. I wrote it down.